shadow frequency, where the veil between this world and the next grows thin. The things that whisper in the dark are given voice. From the cryptic candlelit studios, deep in the Indiana forests, your host, Matt Wilson, and his spectral producer, Juniper Ravenwood, unearth the forbidden, the forgotten, and the fearsome. So, still your heart, dim the light, and listen closely. For once you tune into the shadow frequency, you may never tune out.
All right, Matt. Opening the file cabinet. Okay, first thing out is a single hearing aid.
That's unsettling already.
It gets worse. When I hold it up, it crackles with whispering.
Nope. Put that back before it starts saying our names.
And now I've got a library book that's overdue by 52 years.
That's a fine you never recover from.
Yeah, and every other page is full of handwritten warnings.
Warnings about what?
I don't know, but a lot of them end with exclamation points, which feels aggressive. And here it is, tonight's case file.
Let's open it.
Episode 306, The Delphos Ring.
A glowing craft, a silent Kansas night, and a strange ring left behind in the earth that refused to behave like anything ordinary. I'm Matt Wilson.
And I'm Juniper Ravenwood.
You are tuned to the shadow frequency, where every whisper tells a story from beyond the veil. Hosted by Matt Wilson. Produced by Juniper Ravenwood. With Chris Beach. The darkness continues.
Tonight's file feels like it came out of the cabinet already humming. Kansas, 1971. A farm at dusk. Sheep shifting in the field. A teenage boy looks toward a tree line and sees something glowing low to the ground. Close enough to judge its shape, its size, even the sound it makes. And when that thing rises and slips away into the dark, it leaves behind something that should not be waiting there in the dirt.
And that is exactly the kind of file I don't like opening right before bedtime, Juniper. A glowing object is one thing. A ring left behind in the soil like the ground itself got marked by whatever hovered there, that's a whole different level of wrong.
That's what makes Delphos linger. This is not just a light-in-the-sky story. This is a case with a witness, a family, a photographed ground trace, preserved samples, and researchers who kept coming back to the same ugly little question. What got into that dirt?
And tonight we're heading out to north central Kansas, to a farm outside Delphos where a close encounter may have left more than a memory behind.
So settle in, keep a lamp on if you need one, and let Matt crack open the file on the Delphos Ring.
Thanks, Juniper, for digging into the file cabinet and pulling out a case that feels like it still has Kansas dust on it. Tonight, we're going back to November 2nd, 1971, just outside Delphos, Kansas. Not a city street, not a crowded highway, a farm, open country, tree line, sheep pen, wind moving over fields, the kind of place where ordinary sounds carry, and where anything unusual feels even more out of place because there is so little around to hide it. That evening, 16-year-old Ronald Johnson was out tending sheep on his family's farm when he became aware of something under a tree about 75 feet away. According to the case record, this was not some vague flash miles off in the sky. Ronald described a structured object, brightly illuminated, about 9 feet across and around 10 feet high, hovering roughly 2 feet off the ground. He said it was covered in blue, red, and orange light, and it made a rumbling sound he compared to an old washing machine vibrating. He also described a bright glow between the object and the ground while it hovered there. And that detail matters. because that image is where Delphos begins to separate itself from 1,000 other old UFO stories. This was not just a bright thing overhead. Ronald's account places it low, close, and grounded in the physical world, beneath a tree, near the sheep, near a shed, in range of sound, in range of distance, in a place where if something is there, it ought to leave some sign that it was ever there at all. Ronald watched it for several minutes. Then the light at the base intensified, and the object moved off, angling away and clearing a nearby shed by only a few feet. The rumbling shifted into a higher-pitched sound. Ronald said the brightness hurt his eyes. He ran to get his parents. By the time the family came back outside, they could still see a bright object moving away in the southern sky. But the sky was not the strangest thing anymore. The strangest thing was now on the ground. At the spot where the object had hovered, the Johnsons found a pale ring in the soil. Reports described it as gray-white, slick, crust-like, almost as if the dirt had been crystallized. The family said it seemed to glow that night. Johnson was so struck by what she was seeing that she grabbed a Polaroid camera and photographed it. And when family members touched the ring, they said their fingers went numb, like local anesthetic had been applied. Ronald also reported painful eyes and headaches in the days after the sighting. Now just stop there for a second and imagine that scene. You've already watched something impossible rise from the edge of your property. It moves off into the dark, and instead of the fear fading with it, the fear is left behind, not in your imagination, in the dirt, in a circle you can walk up to, a circle you can photograph, a circle that feels wrong to the touch. That is why Delphos endures. By the next day, the local sheriff had photographed the ring and taken samples. Later investigators, most notably Ted Phillips, came in and treated the site not just like a spooky story, but like a physical trace case. Phillips would become one of the best-known names in landing trace UFO research, and Delphos became one of the cases most closely associated with that side of the mystery. Farrak's later paper says the sheriff's next-day photograph showed the ring as a white surface visible in moonlight, and that Phillips's early investigation documented unusually strong water resistance in the soil. And the ring itself was no tiny mark. The reports describe an area roughly 8 feet across, light-colored against darker muddy ground around it. Phillips's investigation found that the soil behaved differently from the surrounding area, especially in the way it resisted moisture. In places, that effect reportedly extended down about 14 inches. At one point, the ring area was still covered by unmelted snow, while the ground around it had turned muddy. That is the kind of detail that gives a case teeth, because it suggests a difference in the soil itself, not just a trick of light or a frightened memory. And what makes this even eerier is how old-fashioned it all feels. No phone video, no instant uploads, no flood of online guesses within minutes. Just a family on a farm, a strange light, a ring in the earth, a sheriff's photograph, and a problem that did not quietly go away. Because once Delphos entered the UFO files, it stayed there. Researchers kept returning to the dirt. Samples were preserved. Years later, those samples would be revisited with more modern techniques. And even before you get to the lab work, the atmosphere of the case already gets under your skin. A hovering object beneath a tree, a bright glow against the ground, a ring that seems pale, slick, and wrong, a numbness that lingers after touching it, a patch of earth that, for whatever reason, no longer behaves like the earth around it. That is the first hook in Delphos. Not that someone saw something weird. Plenty of people claim that. The hook is that when the thing left, the ground didn't immediately forget. And when dirt starts keeping secrets, that's when a case really starts to haunt me.
Yeah, because lights in the sky drift away. A ring in the soil sits there waiting for you to kneel down next to it.
And in the second half, we get into the chemistry, the hydrophobic soil, the later analysis, and the one skeptical angle that still doesn't quite shut the file. Juniper, take it away.
The deeper you get into Delphos, the stranger it feels. A witness account is unsettling enough, but a ring in the ground that got photographed, sampled, and analyzed years later, that is where this thing starts crawling out of folklore and into something a little harder to ignore. And I have to wonder what everybody listening is thinking right now. Are you picturing reflected moonlight on pale dirt? Or are you picturing something hovering over a Kansas field and dripping whatever it was carrying into the ground below? Let's kick it over to Chris.
Thanks, Juniper. While we've got a minute here in the shadows, do us a favour and hit like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. That really helps us with the algorithms and helps more people find the shadow frequency. Follow us on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, and all the major podcast directories. Head over to shadowfrequencypodcast.com for every episode, our companion blog, merch, show notes, and even a way to buy us a coffee or send us a message we might use on the show. And before I hand it back, Matt and I want to let everybody know you can catch us on Radio Freedom's Easter broadcast coming up at radiofreedom.co.uk. And with that, back to Juniper.
Time to fire up the spectral cosmic message materializer. Flipping the switches now. Let's see what it spits out of the static. Here we go. A curious little dispatch just drifted in through the ether.
Message retrieved from the void.
Let's unfold this midnight note and see what our listener had to say. My name is Elise M., and I'm writing in from Halifax, Nova Scotia. I usually listen to the shadow frequency pretty late at night while I'm baking for the next morning. There's something about being alone in the kitchen with the house quiet, the oven humming, and one of your episodes playing that just makes the whole night feel a little more mysterious. I listen on YouTube, and I've been hooked for a while now. My favorite episodes are the ones about hauntings, time slips, and UFO encounters. Especially when it's one of those stories where there's just enough detail to make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, something really strange happened. Ty, you both have such a great way of making it feel like the listener is right there in the room with you, digging through the file cabinet and getting pulled into whatever creepy case is on deck that night. It's become one of my favorite parts of the week. Keep up the amazing work and please never run out of weirdness. Listening by oven light, that is an absolutely perfect shadow frequency listening setup. Late night baking, quiet house, oven glow, and something strange coming through the speakers. That feels extremely on brand, and we love that you've made us part of that routine. And thank you for the kind words about the file cabinet. It is still full of alarming nonsense and apparently has no intention of behaving itself anytime soon. If you want to write in like Elise, send us an email at shadowpodcast@protonmail.com. We always love hearing where you're listening from, what platform you use, and which kinds of cases keep you up the latest. Now let's hand it back over to Matt for the second half.
You are tuned to the shadow frequency, where every whisper tells a story from beyond the veil. The darkness continues.
Thanks, Juniper. And Elites, baking by oven light while listening to hauntings and UFO encounters is exactly the kind of energy this show was built for. Now, back to Delphos. What keeps this case alive is not just Ronald Johnson's description of the object. It's what happened when investigators started working on the soil itself. In his 1989 Journal of UFO Studies paper, chemist Errol Farouk wrote that the family's report involved a luminescent object, a soil ring that underwent physical and chemical change, and effects that lasted for months. He noted the witness's numbness after touching the ring, Ronald's sore eyes and headaches, and the sheriff's next-day samples and photograph. He also documented the ring's strong resistance to water and argued that the material involved behaved like a highly water-soluble metal salt of an organic carboxylic acid. That sounds technical, but the important part is this. The ring soil did not behave like normal soil. Faruk described it as surprisingly impervious to water until agitation broke the effect and released a clear brownish yellow to reddish solution. He compared the foaming action to household detergent and proposed a surfactant-like effect, where an introduced compound effectively coated the soil and changed how it interacted with water. That is a weird sentence to say out loud about a Kansas farm, but it is exactly why this case sticks. A witness story is one thing. Altered ground chemistry is something else. Then, decades later, Phyllis Budinger reanalyzed preserved samples. Her 1999 report said there had been a definite release of material, most probably deposited as an aqueous solution, and that non-volatile residue still coated the soil surface and still imparted the hydrophobic effect noted nearly 27 years earlier. She estimated that released non-volatile material accounted for roughly 2 to 3% of the ring soil and identified major components including humic substance, probably low molecular weight fulvic acid, plus calcium oxalate, calcium carbonate, trace phosphate, sulfate, and very small amounts of sulfide or mercaptan. Budinger also found that the ring and control samples were not identical. Her elemental data showed differences consistent with added sulfur, calcium, carbon, and nitrogen, and she described white fibrous or stratum-like material in ring samples associated with calcium oxalate and quartz. In plain language, later testing did not come back with nothing to see here. It came back with evidence that something had indeed been deposited in that soil. Now, this is where we give the one skeptical beat the case deserves. Faruk himself noted that the famous glowing ring element gets softer when you look closely. The Polaroid taken that night was considered inconclusive because analysis suggested a high contribution from reflected moonlight off the pale surface of the ring. The sheriff's next-day photograph also showed the ring was light enough in color that moonlight could plausibly have made it look luminous. So if somebody says maybe the ring didn't truly glow the way later retellings imply, that is a fair caution. But here is why the file does not close. Even if you dial back the dramatic claim of a supernatural glow, the ring itself remains. The strange soil remains. The water resistance remains. The preserved samples remain. Budinger's conclusion was not that this proved a UFO. In fact, she explicitly said the analysis neither proved nor ruled out a UFO source. And she also found no sign that the ring soil had been exposed to high temperature. That matters because it keeps the case honest. No easy burn mark from rocket exhaust solution. No scientific stamp saying extraterrestrials confirmed. Just a documented release of unusual material in a ring where witnesses said an object hovered. Faruk also examined alternate explanations, including hoax and fungal ring. He argued hoax was unlikely based on the unusual and air-sensitive chemistry, though not impossible, and said a fungal ring explanation had problems because the chemistry did not fit neatly, the ring did not expand the way fungal rings normally do, and the sheriff's early sample showed no fungal growth at that stage. Again, that is not proof of anything alien, but it is a reason the mundane explanations never fully managed to sweep Delphos off the table. And then there is the place Delphos took in UFO history. Faruk wrote that the case received a Blue Ribbon Best Case Award because of its high strangeness, and later skeptical commentary acknowledged that the National Enquirer's Blue Ribbon panel had singled it out as especially valuable evidence, even while skeptics argued hard about what that evidence really meant. In other words, Delphos became bigger than one family's story, because even people who disagreed about it could not quite leave it alone. That's why I think Delphos remains so eerie. It sits in the uncomfortable middle, not clean enough for the skeptics, not conclusive enough for the believers. It gives you a witness account with sensory detail, a family reaction, physiological after effects that were reported early, a photographed ring, a sheriff's samples, Ted Phillips's fieldwork, and later chemistry that still said the ring soil was not the same as the soil around it. So what happened on that farm outside Delphos? A misperception? A strange but natural deposit? A hoax no one fully demonstrated? Or did Ronald Johnson really watch something hover over Kansas soil and leave part of itself behind? That's the part that lingers with me, not the object in the sky. The ring in the dirt, because sky stories drift away. Ground traces stay put. They wait. They stain a place. And in Delphos, the most unsettling possibility is that for one November evening in 1971, the earth itself was used like a receipt. And that may be the creepiest thing about Delphos. Not that something was seen, but that the ground may have kept the signature.
Yeah, that one's nasty. A sighting can fade into memory. A circle in the dirt feels like a message left on purpose.
Whether it was something extraordinary or something we still just don't understand, Delphos stays weird because the evidence never became simple, and that's enough to keep the file open. Juniper, take us home.
Tonight we open the file on the Delphos Ring, the Say, a 1971 Kansas close encounter that did not end in the sky but in the soil. A hovering object, a pale ring in the dirt, numb fingers, painful eyes, sheriff's photographs, preserved samples, and decades of questions that still refuse to settle. Thanks for spending part of your night with us here in the shadows. If you want to reach out, send your stories, thoughts, or listener mail to shadowpodcast@protonmail.com. You can also find us at shadowfrequencypodcast.com, where you'll find episodes, show notes, the companion blog, merch, and more. And don't forget to follow along on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Rumble. We'll be back soon with another strange case from somewhere just beyond the edge of the ordinary. Matt, want to say goodnight?
Keep looking up, and maybe once in a while look down too.
Good night from the Shadow Frequency. Stay strange.
This episode was conjured with a solemn vow to explore the unexplained while remaining bound to the truths that have been unearthed. All interpretations are speculative and offered only for your enlightenment.